Hello, my name is Raul Fernandez, Select Board Member and Chair of the Task Force to Reimagine Policing in Brookline. Welcome to our meeting for Friday, December 18th, 2020. This is our final meeting of the 2020 calendar year before we pick our work back up in January in the new year. We've got some business to attend to today. We are also meeting the day after, a major snowstorm walloped the New England area and elsewhere. And many thanks to all the folks who do the things that often allow us to move unimpeded through Brookline. The things that allow us, to have our trash picked up and to live in a clean and taken care of community. Those are the folks from DPW, Department of Public Works, who worked very diligently yesterday to clear roads and to try to make getting around as safe as possible for everyone. And so just wanted to give a shout out to them on this day. Appreciate all their good work. So let's get into it. We've got today, we're just going to approve some meeting minutes. If there is anything to update on the policing survey, I don't know that there is. I think we decided we're going to tackle that in January, but we've got it on the agenda just in case. We've got some opportunity for subcommittee updates. I want to make sure that we reserve the bulk of our time for presentation and recommendations that are coming forth from the Departmental Analysis Subcommittee. So you'll see that on the agenda as well. And there's an opportunity for any new business that might come our way. Okay, so first and foremost, I've got no announcements or anything at the top other than what I just said. Anything anyone else would like to say as we get kicked off? Hearing none, let's get into it. You'll have another opportunity later in the meeting if you'd like. So meeting minutes, this is approving the meeting minutes from Friday, December 11th, 2020. Anyone have any updates they'd like to share with Devin or the group now on the meeting minutes? Looking good. Let's go ahead right to approval. As always, I'm just going to go right across and just say yes, no, abstain. And these are the meeting minutes from Friday, December 11th, 2020. Malcolm, what say you?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Alexander?
Yes.
Kristen?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Eitan?
Yep. Yes.
Almas?
Yes.
Chi-Chi?
Yes.
Bonnie?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Okay, great. Let's move on. Are there any updates regarding the policing survey at this point?
Just the people have continued to trickle in here. We have 1,300 responses, which is pretty good, right? So that's over 5% of the people we sent it to, but really we know that probably almost 20% or so people didn't get it because the addresses are obsolete or whatever. So pretty good response rate. Of those, we have over 50 people who identify as Latinx, over 30 who identify as African American. So we should feel good about being able to look at at the survey by racial subgroup. I don't remember the number of Asian identifiers, but it's a lot. Yeah, starting over the Christmas break, I'm gonna start analyzing the data.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Eitan. Any questions right now? I know we've discussed this at length. All right, great. Let's get into our subcommittee updates. Moving right along. First up, vulnerable people and people in crisis.
Okay, I can start and jump in, and
Okay.
Alex. So we pretty much are just working on like finalizing our steps so that in preparation for the final report. So we've just been discussing what our next steps are. And I think we had mentioned last week perhaps that Anne has set up the meeting with Cahoots for January 7th, which would be our next meeting, because the next two Thursdays are like Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, and we decided we wouldn't meet then. The other thing that we talked about actually that we want to focus a little bit more on is we listened, Anne and I listened in on the Police Reforms Committee on Wednesday. Perhaps some others of you were also there. But just to talk about their subcommittee that's meeting for the first time. There's a mental health and substance abuse subcommittee that's meeting on Monday morning, and Anne and I are both hoping to join that. Meanwhile, I have been in separate conversations with Elizabeth Childs, and because she's the one who's, I believe, chairing that subcommittee, and I'm going to try to talk with her separately on Saturday just to fill in on what we're doing. And because some of the things we heard there, they also brought up cahoots, and it was like, okay, I mean, that's the alternative that we're considering. But they also talked about expanding what's currently exists in the police force. Right? We just have Annabelle, maybe adding more social workers. So when our subcommittee had met, we had kind of explore the idea of, okay, should we build on what we already have? And then we decided, no, we are going to go completely alternative and just, not like build, and because we didn't believe police should be part of crises, the crisis interventions initiatives. So it's kind of interesting to listen to them and just hear what they said about, and then there's another task force apparently also on unhoused people that I believe Casey Hatchett talked about that they're going to be doing. So I guess we just want to like connect a little bit just to make sure we're doing different things and focusing on different things. And so, Anne, do you want to say anything more about that?
Sure. So I guess, again, they're starting this new subcommittee on mental health and substance use specifically, I believe. I listened in on the police reform committee full meeting the other night too. I think we should certainly be aware of the work they're doing in that subcommittee. My feeling is it's markedly different from the work we're doing in our subcommittee, but obviously we should be checking in with what they're doing as well. They seem, very focused on, as they should be, I guess, on police reform and thinking about what they can do in terms of police responses to crisis needs in the community. Their approach seems significantly different from ours. Cahoots, we are meeting with the director of consulting services for Cahoots, which is a crisis service support alternative to police crisis support based in Eugene, Oregon, as part of a larger clinic that's been in their community for a number of decades called Whitebird. They are getting a lot of national attention these days, the Cahoots model, and started a consulting arm of the model where they are helping other towns and cities across the United States to develop their own crisis alternatives to police crisis response. And so the director of the consulting services arm of Cahoots is going to meet with us on January 7th to help us understand more what their model does and doesn't do, and as well as ask questions about their work helping other cities and towns develop their own models and how that works. If anybody wants to join us, please feel free. I think it should be a pretty illuminating session, and we'll take it from there. I'm meeting by telephone next week with another crisis support service director of this much more kind of anti-police kind of different kind of crisis support service team in Sacramento on Monday morning. The nurse practitioner who runs it and I are going to meet by telephone. And I will determine based on our phone call whether we should, as a subcommittee, invite her to come meet with us as well for a full meeting or not. So that's all happening. And
I think we also had wanted to talk about existing Brookline resources. And so one of the things we want to put into our final report is what actually exists and then what gaps there are, so that and then we lead into our final recommendations as to what we want to propose. So I think that we tried to look and see, and I put a list together, but I'm wondering if this our task force can also sort of help to identify if you all know of other existing resources in Brookline on, for substance use, unhoused people, and mental health. I think we have kind of a good feel for the mental health piece. So I don't know whether if it's possible to do like an email and send people the list that I looked at, and then see if people can add in. I think that should be okay. It doesn't have if it's just like logistical stuff. I believe that's okay to do an email. But because one of the things, like for unhoused people, there's tons of stuff in Boston and Cambridge, but there's not much in Brookline. And so, but perhaps there are things that have been missing as far as what's existing. And I know, Bonnie, you probably have a fairly good feel for what exists where you're with Mutual Aid Brookline. So I know we were thinking if we could do that with the subcommittee and see if other people have thoughts about what to add on.
Yep. Because in terms of our final report and recommendations, we're just wanting to make sure that we have a complete list of the resources that are already out there for folks, that we can potentially connect with organizations we haven't thought of up to now in terms of developing work for the future. So yeah, if anybody has ideas, recommendations of places we should reach out to, please let us know.
I would also just say it makes sense to me anyway to run that list when you start compiling an early list, to bring in folks that you already know from the Brookline Center.
Right.
I'd even say Annabelle Lane, the social worker at the police department, and potentially others, to just say, hey, what do is anything missing from this list based on your work?
Right. No, we'll definitely be doing that.
Yeah, great.
As well. Let me just see if there were other.
I think we want to talk about Alex Vita.
Vitali. Somebody in our meeting last night, Ryan Black, made a public comment and suggested that we should meet with Alex Vitali, who is a fairly well-known professor and on alternatives to police services and supports, and wrote a book. What is the book called?
End of Policing.
End of Policing? Yeah, something like that. And Ryan suggested that maybe our subcommittee might want to meet with him, and then I thought maybe the entire task force, it might be worthwhile to invite him for maybe like a half-hour presentation to our task force on his thoughts and his research about police, reimagining police. So we want to just mention that. And let me just make sure in the notes I'm not missing anything else. We're definitely going to be continuing our conversation with the Brookline Mental Health Center. Somebody from there reached out to me and wants to talk with me about their experiences working there in the community. So I'm going to be meeting with them, hopefully. And I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that we'll bring back the Community Center for Brookline Mental Health once we have our final recommendations together, and we want to just connect and say, hey, what do you think about this? And, hopefully sometime in mid-January, we'll do that. So,
I'd love to have them involved in, at some point, we're going to be presenting these, our work to the community.
Yeah.
I'd love to have them be part of in the audience, participating, commenting on our work at that point too. So
Absolutely. They are, at this point, the main resource that we've found to date for community services and supports for people in crisis or vulnerable people in Brookline. And I think they have a lot of resources available already, and they're very interested in continuing the work, and involving them is important.
Can I ask you a question about so I'm very excited to hear from the director of consulting services at Cahoots. That's on January 7th. That's the same day we're going to be having our task force meeting. What time is that meeting? Does that
6 o'clock
6 p.m.
p.m.
Great. Will that be recorded? Is that something
We can, I guess, or can we? Alex, we can. Not
This
through
is- yeah.
Alex's Zoom link, but maybe if we have access to a
different.
different Zoom link.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
I just think. Oh, go ahead, Alex. Sorry.
No. We've discussed this, Raul. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah. I understand why it wouldn't be through your link. I just think there are some, like, I went back and I'm watching the was it from day before yesterday? I think the walk and talk subcommittee and the interviews. It's really helpful to be able to watch the interviews, see how things went down, hear from the interviewees firsthand. So I know that there are some circumstances in which case where we're not going to want to record for various reasons. But whenever those limitations aren't there, I'd love it if we could, just because I think it's benefit to the task force members in particular who can't necessarily make all of the other subcommittee meetings. So if it's possible, that's great. I'd be happy to, make myself available and offer up my own link to be able to. I wouldn't host the meeting. I would host it, but you would.
Bonnie also just offered, I see in the chat. So
okay, great. Yeah,
we can work it out. I think that would
Work
be
it out.
great. I mean, I'm really hoping that we get a lot of rich information from him. Tim Black is his name, I believe. And, potentially work toward maybe even a follow-up conversation down the line.
Yeah, this is one where I might want to invite the rest of the select board too, if they're available to be there, and if they can't be, then they can watch afterwards. But I know obviously Bernard's been in all of our meetings. John follows our work very closely, but I want to make sure the entire select board is hearing some of these ideas too. So,
Yep.
great.
And actually, we're just beginning to develop the interview questions for that night. And if anybody has specific questions that they would like answered from this task force, please just email us and let us know so we can add them in.
Or we can share the Google Docs that
Right.
and they can just put it into the Google Docs, which might be
Yep.
more.
But if you have a sudden brainstorm of something you
Right.
really want to ask about, please also just let us know. One thing I want to ask him about is funding for such programs. In his work, reaching out to other cities and towns, how are cities and towns funding the development of these programs, aside from potentially maybe taking some of the funding from the police department and crisis services and supports and reallocating it somewhere else? Where else are people getting funding from? Are there grants? Are there other things we should be thinking about? Because I really feel this should not be a volunteer type of effort, that people should be paid
Right.
for their work in serving the community. And so that seems like an important piece of it.
Very. And then on the Alex Vitale book, I would just recommend, we did talk about this earlier in our meetings, and as Bonnie points out, it's part of our sort of resources there on our drive. It's, for those who think that the title of it is scary, I'd encourage you to check it out. I mean, there are a number of chapters that actually connect with the work that we're doing right now and some of the conversations we're having. So you can actually just, if you don't have time to read the entire book, you can actually pick out different chapters, and they're really digestible, and so I encourage you to check it out. All right, questions? Any other questions for the vulnerable people and people in crisis subcommittee? Alex.
I was sadly unable to attend. I'm actually in the midst of finals period at the moment. So this is the 2 hours I could manage to be here. But I was unable to attend our subcommittee meeting yesterday. And it almost, do we have any sense that Alex Vitale is available for this type of meeting?
Yeah,
I imagine he's pretty busy.
He's very accessible,
Okay.
apparently, and very
Awesome.
interested in sharing his research and ideas with people. And I know he's met, I believe he met with some folks in Brookline a few months ago, maybe part of Brookline Budget Justice, I believe. They had a meeting with
I think it was
him.
like a Zoom call or something that they had organized.
But apparently he's very accessible and very willing to talk. So yeah, that was
Great. Anyone else?
Mike.
Great
Did
work.
you have something? Oh, okay.
Just the meeting with the codes director, I definitely want to sit down on that and hear what he or she, it's he or
He,
has to
yeah.
say. Yeah, has to say. But one of the things is that I looked at the website and there's some fairly substantial amount of money that they feel that the town or the city of Eugene is saved, and that's very persuasive to some part of Brookline's establishment, if I can say that, including me. So I'd be very interested in hearing, how they got to that conclusion, and a little bit about how they're budgeted and how that's affected the police budget.
Yep, absolutely. Please come and.
Oh yeah, I'll be there.
Yeah. Really great work here. Thank you so much. I know, there was, those first few meetings where you're trying to sort of get your legs and figure out exactly which direction you want to go, and it looks like you're going right after it. So this is terrific. Thank you, everyone on the subcommittee, for your work here. Okay, I've got to move on. I'm trying my best to preserve an hour, if need be, for our conversation on this this other departmental analysis subcommittee report and recommendations, because you may have some thoughts and some feedback or pushback. I'm gonna make sure we have time for that. So next up is the Walk and Talk subcommittee.
Hey, Walk and Talk had a big week this week. As Raul mentioned, we had an interview with Officer Stevenson, Pilgrim, and Officer Lawler. And it was off to a strange start because it seems there was a message, either a post or an email that went out to Walk and Talk to people who are people who have relationships with Walk and Talk officers, perhaps, that said that we were having this meeting, and that our goal was to disband the Walk and Talk program, and for people to please show up to defend and speak in favor of the Walk and Talk program. And all of that is misinformation. It was not a public hearing. Our purpose is not to disband the Walk and Talk officers. That's not the goal. So that resulted in a lot of people coming to the meeting and a lot of people getting upset because we did not allow public comment, because we had an hour to ask really, really important questions. So, we made the announcement that everyone other than the 3 Walk and Talk officers should step back. We're not going to take comment unless there's a specifically asked question to, any other officer in the room or whatever else. And that resulted in some bad feelings that erupted on Facebook later. So that was really unfortunate and created a very adversarial situation that was palpable. I think, throughout the whole meeting with everyone involved, and that was really unfortunate. But we did get a lot of information. We got to have a conversation that was really important to our research. I don't know how much we want to walk through the details of it. There is a recording of it for everyone to watch. We did record it. Does anyone else from that meeting have particular highlights you want to talk about?
It felt very adversarial, which was really unfortunate. We don't know how that misinformation got out into the public prior to our meeting, but again, we only had 60 minutes. We had a series of interview questions. Sometimes we do take public comments in meetings, but we knew weren't going to have the time to do that. And it set it up that it set up an atmosphere that made it challenging for us to kind of mediate through the meeting. I mean, I do agree with Bonnie. We got a fair amount of detail from the officers, which was useful. I found myself spending a lot of time in the chat group, unfortunately, trying to mitigate angry responses we were getting from the public. Why aren't you letting us talk? Which was a little frustrating. So I'm probably going to listen to the recording again because I think I missed some of the answers.
Right. So I'm sorry, Anne.
Yeah.
Cut me off. The biggest takeaways from the interview that that I personally got is that walk and talk officers do great work for some of the community members. That's very clear. People, there is a community of people that really, really love the program, and that nuance needs to be respected. That isn't to say that that the other side of that nuance doesn't exist. All that being said, our job as the Walk and Talk Subcommittee is not to disband the program, but to try to provide the evaluation that has never been done in the context of BHA community's perspective in the entire 30 years of the program's existence. And in doing so, to create recommendations. Our job is to lift up the voices that are not often heard, that feel very differently about the Walk and Talk program, because those are not the ones that are heard, because they're not going to come to the police, et cetera, et cetera. So, what we heard was that they love their job, that, many examples of experiences that they've had helping people in the community, and it was great. We need to comb back through the recording of it to get some real details for you, and maybe even, post a small report on that meeting by itself. Does anyone have specific questions about that? Or comments? Did you get to watch it?
So I just wanted to let folks know that I put the link to the Facebook post in the chat, so you can actually see some of the conversation and some of the criticism that you guys were getting. And you can see from the initial post, it was the walk and talk officers themselves that sent out some sort of communication to some of the residents saying, we're about to be disbanded, show up to this hearing. So I want to make that clear for the record.
I watched the whole of the video. I thought that was a really interesting meeting. I thought that you, under the circumstances, you ran it very well. There's a lot in there to think about from the perspective of the officers. I thought they really felt very defensive. You could see that right from the beginning, and that it took a while before that melted down a bit and you got a little bit, the conversation flowed a little bit more freely. But if anybody has the time, there's an hour or so to watch, it's really worth watching.
Right. It was a good meeting. There are two sides to this conversation. the larger portion is the community input, but these interviews are very important. And yeah, it feels like that got, that idea is cut off when a post like that goes out, that this, we're just gonna not listen to the community and just move forth and abruptly cut off a service. The point of all of the work that we're doing here, I think it's important to mention, is to make every part of our community safer. No one here has any intention of cutting some resource off that is vital to them. That is not the point here. That's not my personal goal in my own life, in the policing work that I do. That's not the goal of the Walk and Talk, and that's not the goal of the whole task force. Just to be crystal clear for anyone who's unclear on that. We are asking questions. We have a right to ask questions, and that's what we're doing.
Can I say something, Bonnie?
And also, if anyone, we want to hear every single community member's input. All of the other part of my update is that the flyers are being posted. If anyone is listening, there is contact information. You can call and report on any part of the Brookline Police Department you like, whether it's walk and talk officers, school resource officers, any part of the work that we're doing here, please call or email us with a statement or a story you want to tell us. The contact number is 857-245-5072. The email is reimaginepolicingbrookline@gmail.com. Please give us your story. We want to hear it, just not in that particular meeting.
Kimberly?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I feel like I'm frozen. I just wanted to chime in a little bit about that meeting, and I felt so uncomfortable. You could tell that the officers were on defense from the beginning, and I felt right away my voice being silenced, and I wasn't even going to say anything. And if you see the video, I didn't say anything until the last 6 minutes of the meeting. And then I, as someone, who lives in housing and who's not had to, but chose to use walk and talk officers, I felt, I can't tell you, it was as if, these officers were looking at me saying, you've used us before, so why are you here? And that made me want to be here even more. And it was as if the perspective of these officers, thinking I don't think they get it. They don't get that. I don't care when this program was established, and people aren't talking about why it was and what it looks like and what it feels like for people like myself. And I even felt that in the room that day. I just wanted to put that out there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I have one more part of the update, but I want to make sure that there's room.
Yeah, I want to say one thing. I think I'm seeing the post for the first time. This is officers undermining the work of this task force with scare tactics. They're going to disband us, come and tell them not to do that. When we have a police liaison to this task force that knows better than that. I see Casey Hatchett, their supervisor, who's been at every one of these meetings, who should know better than that. And I know that others are following our work and that know that what we're trying to do is to evaluate programs where there have been concerns raised, and that the community should be able to do this without being vilified, to be able to interrogate programs that currently exist, see whether or not there need to be changes made to those programs, or yes, whether or not we should have a different approach to solving the problems that may very well exist in our community. And to be for messages to go out from folks who work for the town, who should know better, to undermine this work and to say they're trying to do this thing, which is not true, or to mischaracterize the work of the task force, is beyond frustrating. It's upsetting and it's unacceptable. And Mel, please, I'd love to hear from you on this. I see your hand raised. I just wish, we're trying to go through a process that's been approved by the select board to evaluate these programs. I think it's been a fairly fair process, and I'd be curious to hear what you have to say on it.
Well, the reason why I'm here at this meeting, why I identified the former chief, is because we're part of this process, and the select board who directs the policy in this town has identified a task force that needs to reimagine policing. So I think it's unfortunate. I don't, this is the first time hearing of it. And of course, I'm going to talk to the acting chief of police right after this meeting and talk about this particular communication and incident. But I will say that, you've heard it before, you've seen it before in your public hearing. Whenever there are public events like this in the political arena, this happens all the time. I see it all the time on both sides of the issue. But obviously, I don't want the town to be interfering or in some way giving a different message than what the select board and the town administrator and the acting chief of police were on board with this process. That's all I can say. I will investigate with the acting chief of police this particular communication.
I appreciate that, Mel. Thank you. And that's our town administrator, Mel Kleckner, for those who aren't aware. I'll say too that that when you watch this video, you see 3 people who care about their job, who are clearly trying to get it right. And these are the 3 officers I'm talking about who care about their job, that are clearly trying to get it right. That it appear are there for the right reasons, right? As far as I'm watching there. And so it's not about individual officers and how, again, good or bad or anything like that. It's about making sure we have the right systems in place to meet the needs of our community. And so I see hands up, so I'll allow others to be able to chime in. The first hand I see up there is Alexander's.
I'm sorry, Chi-Chi spoke up before me.
Oh, Chi-Chi, please go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Alexander. I just wanted to follow up on Mel Kleckner's point about the public hearing. We're aware of this because somebody posted the message from the officers on Facebook. I would bet a lot of money that similar messages went out before the September public hearing as well. It's just they didn't get published. And I know I'm getting into the subcommittee report for community engagement, but I think that there's a larger picture and a larger problem here, which is an overall defensive attitude by the police department to this, and an unwillingness to maybe be open and be receptive to, hey, let's look at different ways of doing things that might be an improvement and might improve things for the community. There doesn't seem to be an attitude that we're public servants and, we're hearing feedback and criticism and we should process this and take it into account. It seems to be an attitude of adversarial combat. And I think that's problematic, not just for the work of this task force, but overall the relationship between the police department and the community.
Thank you, Chi-Chi. Alexander?
There were a number of things that I wanted to say that Rahul and Chi-Chi you said so beautifully. I'm not going to go into. The one thing I do want to say, though, is that for the officers or for whoever is creating these posts, I think what I'm hearing from a lot of officers right now, from what I'm hearing across the country, there's many police officers who are really frustrated by the perception that there are issues in police departments, and they want people to see all the good work that they do. And they don't want there to be this perception that they are resistant to change. or to efforts to make the world a better place. And I really got to ask you, why would you pull this? You know, if you're trying to fight against that perception, why do something like this?
Thank you. Malcolm.
Thanks. I'm going to try and make this quick because I just want to say, man, I really disagree in terms of like, you know, things sort of being equally organized on both sides. And I think as a town employee, we have lots of policies and things like that. And when town employees put out disinformation or misinformation, we should all be held to a higher standard. If I, as a teacher, were to put out misinformation about Brookline Public Schools or about the history department or about MECO, that would be really problematic. And so for us to act like town employees didn't use a town email and disseminate information that was misinformation, I think we have to acknowledge that that is a real issue. And that's not two-sided. This is not fine people on both sides. It's just not. And like, you know, yeah, I'm really struggling with that. It's not somebody who just lives in town, but also who works for the town. And so, yeah, I think, you know, it's one thing for citizenry to do activism. It's another thing for town employees to do it. And I'm just hoping we understand that.
Thanks, Malcolm. Mel?
Well said, Malcolm. I said that this would be investigated, and I am not in any way trying to, by my comments about, you know, that politics is a tough game here, and there's a lot of organizing going on, and you know, but you're right, and town employees cannot misrepresent or try to influence the message. I agree with that, and that will be investigated.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Eitan.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that point. I mean, it is an issue of public safety. If a public safety officer misinforms the public about public safety. And so I was wondering, Mel, if you can commit to, by next week, giving us an update on any disciplinary action or action that results of your investigation.
No, I can't commit to that, Eitan. I'm not sure to what extent I would be willing to talk publicly about disciplinary measures against a particular person.
Is that's the town line with respect to all disciplinary action?
I don't know. I have to look at that. I'm just not ready to commit to that, to report next week on that. I work for the select board, so I will take my direction from them.
I'll make sure that we connect, Mel, and yeah, and our next meeting is January 7th, by the way, just to make sure no one's here on Christmas Day, trying to meet. But you know, I will say this much: I've been on the board for 2 years, and every time Mel has told me he's going to look into something, he has done that, and he has circled back with me about those issues. So, you know, I have full trust and faith he's going to do that. You know, whether or not the resulting actions meet, you know, each and every one of the expectations of the member of the task force is a different story. But I know that when Mel says he's going to look into something, he does just that. So there you go. Okay, Bonnie, you said there was something out. Oh, go ahead, Ann.
Yeah. No, well, that's what I was going to say. Is
okay, yeah. You said
Bonnie had one more. I assume you're going to talk about the meeting with Michael.
Yes, conversation with Michael Alperin. I had a phone conversation with him.
Remind us who Michael is. Sorry.
Michael Alperin is the executive director of the Brookline Housing Authority. I talked to him about you know, the details, because we know that there's $15,000 that goes from the BHA to the Brookline Police Department. Michael is only been on the job for maybe 5 months. So he is not the historical perspective necessarily. He can tell us some black and white facts. So that's what we have here. So, so he doesn't have the experience to speak about experiences with Walk and Talk, or even, you know, what his community has experienced, because really he's only been there for 5 months and in a pandemic where no one is on the ground really. He did recommend some people for me to talk to about that, which is great. So on the $15,000, in our interview with the 3 Walk and Talk officers, it was noted by myself that the $15,000 was referred to as a grant. It is not a grant. According to Mr. Alperin, and I know Ms. Mel, you are looking into this as well. This is something that's come up in town at the AC meeting and all over the place about this money. This money may have been a grant sometime in the history of the 30 years of the program, but it is not a grant now. Right now, the check is cut directly from the Brookline Housing Authority's operating budget and sent directly to the Brookline Police Department's line item for this. That money, if that payment was stopped, it could be spent on other housing needs. I have been told that it's been made clear to Mr. Alperin that it's an important gesture for the Brookline Housing Authority to make to the Brookline Police Department for the services that they provide, which is really interesting. So that's a gem there. He did go in to say that recently there have been a lot of break-ins with people picking locks. The nature of these issues could be many things, not necessarily, you know, he wasn't characterizing it as some crime ring. It could be many, many things, you know, whatever. But he has a lot of concern for domestic violence survivors housed at BHA, and says that domestic violence survivors are a priority for BHA, and it's very important for him to keep those people feeling safe and secure. So this is a really large issue. He says that this is not an argument for or against Walk and Talk, only a recognition of the necessity to make sure residents feel safe, particularly domestic violence survivors in one way or another, whether that's cameras as deterrents or what have you. And that's the gist of it. And he did say that he's happy to come say these things on the record. I have a public document linked from the documents that are already public, that hopefully are still on the town website, so that you can read through my notes yourself. But that's what we found.
Mel, while you speak, I'm going to paste into the chat for panelists and attendees that the link to that document, if that's okay, Bonnie.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to respond on that $15,000 payment that's been made for this program. I think it precedes my tenure with the town. I believe it was a grant at that. I'm told it was a grant initially, but over time, maybe the grant has evaporated and this payment is still made. I'm still looking into it. I have talked to Michael Alperin about it. $15,000 isn't going to make or break either of us, but I don't want something like this to be perceived as an impediment towards working together. I'm going to resolve the $15,000. I just want to find out a little bit more about the history of it, but I don't think that's going to be a problem going forward. It would be my expectation that we'll just absorb that cost.
Great, thank you, Mel. All right, so again, another group that's really ramped up is getting into. I love these interviews that are going on. I'd love to be able to engage with Michael Alperin at a future meeting. So let us know when that happens, and I'll be in attendance. I'm sure others will be too, to learn more about just the BHA sort of end of things. Keep it up. Thank you so much. All right, I want to move on to the School Resource Officers Subcommittee. Who's taking the lead there?
I'm happy to jump in and then ask that Alexander and Malcolm just follow on. We were fortunate to have Raul with us for a portion of our last discussion, and the issues that we had put out on the table felt like they were kind of a culmination of some things that Malcolm, as his approach kind of as a historian to the work, on trying to unearth the history of SROs in our schools, that because it's so convoluted, because it is difficult for anybody to try to trace the history of the narrative and present a single clear picture, that what may be incumbent on all of us is to have something akin to a reauthorization. Let's reaffirm why we are choosing to do this with all the parties that are involved, so that if, for example, the school committee, who we still want to hear from as part of our subcommittee work, was not originally involved in the choices around the placement of SROs or the crafting of the MOUs, this is an opportunity for us to then make explicit to the community, here's what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that all of the parties involved have the opportunity then to present that back to the town, so we are clear on what we're doing and why. And I would say the bulk of our discussion was among Alexander, Malcolm, Kimberly, and me, trying to get our heads around getting some traction around that approach. Does that feel like a fair update, fellow subcommittee members?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, there's a little limbo with the police reform bill on Charlie Baker's desk, but I think Alexander made a good point. I mean, there is a law, right? And it's been made pretty clear that, you know, it does not actually require a police officer to be located in school, and that, you know, perhaps it would be hard to do that job without being in the school under the current law. But again, pushing a reauthorization, like the fact that, you know, most school committee members have no idea there's a police officer who is located with an office in the school building, as a real town problem. And so, yeah, to sort of force that, you know, that unearthed history that isn't there, and to make it present, to say this is what we need to do as a community.
Yeah, that was absolutely, thank you both for that. That was the focus of our discussion. And I'm looking forward to our next meeting, so we can talk maybe about how we'd like to bring that forward, whether it's in some form of a public hearing and putting this before the school committee. But I do want to mention just one other subject that came up. We continue to discuss, we're trying to set up another meeting with SRO Caitlin Keneally after our last one so badly Zoom bombed that we weren't really able to ask her questions. We did at the very beginning get some answers about, you know, to what extent is she involved. She's never arrested a Brookline student, but what she did say is that she goes with students to court often, or she's done it a number of times to help them through diversionary procedures, which is still, as folks who are involved in the court process know, still very much a process of contact with the criminal legal system and control over a juvenile by-let system. And we talked a little bit about some of the implications there. Without getting too deeply into that, that might be something for us to, I think that there's room, to the extent to which you want to focus on, if we want this position to continue to exist, which I think is and should be up to the public, depending on the statutory floor here, right? I think there's room for discussion of what requirements do we want to make of the SRO position. One thing that keeps coming up is, we love Caitlin, And Caitlin's not always going to be here. So to what extent can we institutionalize the things that we really like about the way she's doing her job? How much do we really want to institutionalize? How much do we want the position, right? So there's a little bit of a debate there. I think that to the extent that you want, to which do you want to institutionalize things, one thing that could be possible might be a requirement to, whenever there's a Brookline student who has any contact with the criminal legal system, to try to advocate to get these cases dismissed, and that's or at least through diversion, because the word of the police in those types of issues means a lot.
Thank y'all. I'll also note that I spoke one-on-one with Suzanne Fetterspiel, the chair of the school committee, about this issue. She is very interested in engaging around it. This is, one of the things that we've learned is that the school committee wasn't involved in the crafting of the MOU or that process. There weren't public hearings about it, or really any involvement whatsoever. And it seems that, especially with new legislation, that it seems this part of the legislation will remain untouched, but we'll see. There's still a few days left in the legislative session. Anything can happen. But there's an opportunity and maybe even a necessity to revisit the entire process, that, the MOU process, if we want to continue down this path. But frankly, that, I think if we're going to continue down this path, or whatever we decide to do, the school committee's got to be involved in those decisions, and not just the school committee. The school committee is a vehicle for the public to be involved in those decisions. And so she's very interested in being part of that process. I know members of the subcommittee are going to be reaching out to her and to other school committee members through her. So I'm very excited for that to be part of the next phase of the work here. Any questions or comments for this group here? All right. Great work, y'all. Really appreciate it. Let's move on to envisioning and community engagement.
I'm going to start this one as well, and then ask other folks to jump in. And I think the best place for us to start would be the points that Chi raised earlier. She kind of gave a little bit of a preview of some of at least one of the important things that we've seemed to be coalescing around as a subcommittee, and it's largely related to the whether it's adversarial or not, the type of relationship that is either emerging or potentially what needs to emerge in order for us to get to the point where there is greater accountability as part of the community and the public's interaction with public safety and law enforcement. Part of what we talked some about as a subcommittee, and I think this kind of goes back to some themes that Eitan surfaced in previous meetings, is how does BPD integrate feedback that the community has for it into the way that they go about their work? Is that to dismiss it? Is it to view it as the opportunity to improve? Is it to regard it as this is adversarial to us and therefore we're going to try to mitigate it, or we're going to try to get it dismissed or put aside or subverted? The degree to which we choose structural solutions around that, and my understanding there may be some recommendations around structural interventions that we might be able to make that have a civilian board component to how we handle portions of the interaction with the public, or whether or not there's purely attitudinal, that we have to find some way to change the climate, to change how that type of feedback gets integrated into the overall planning and discussion of folks working together. I think that's an ongoing thing for us to continue to wrestle with. Two other themes that seem to be emerging from our conversation. One of them is that there are community engagement issues probably across all of the subcommittees, and part of what we may need to do as the community engagement subcommittee is to make sure that we can get all of those brought forward. There were a number of them that were brought up in the other subcommittee that I'm on for SROs. I suspect that that's probably the case for just about every subcommittee, and making sure that those don't end up siloed or isolated, but brought forward we put out on the table, packaging them together as part of the work. And then finally, and then I'll ask the other folks on the subcommittee to jump in, is that there's a long-term component of this that we also have to think about, some of which may be evident in things like the website that Bonnie had mentioned is getting off the ground. But thinking again structurally, how is it that we end up with a long-term way for residents of the town, people who then come into the town, whether it's for business or for just being in the town, to have some way of continuing to interact with some town structure that has responsibility for ensuring that there's accountability, and that adversarial or not relationship does lead to some accountability. And we raised some questions about the degree to which the select board feels like this is part of something that they can give due attention and due focus. There's a lot of things that are in the select board's charge. And if we want to have a long-term structure that allows us to invest in and maintain this relationship, it's going to be important for us to try to figure out the long-term prospects. So other community subcommittee members, I'd appreciate if you jump in to extend or clarify or add it to that.
Yeah, I really am interested in thinking about what is possible beyond the task force and what might be necessary to achieve. How that ties into the town or doesn't, just as a note to get our brains thinking on that and what might be necessary to be considered. And I just got a note from Devin regarding the website. The website's coming along very slowly. And so because of the short time span that we have left, I am setting up a Facebook page. You all might have to mentally support me, because I know I'm opening ourselves up to some stuff by putting our foot into the Facebook realm. It's already set up. I just didn't put it out into the world. So that way we can have a place. The website is still coming, but in the interim, we can put ourselves into the world. We can clarify what we do, which is clearly fuzzy. We can identify who is doing this work. I think that gives us some credibility. And we're not just some random people that don't really care. Here are the names that are involved. Please contact us either through this task force email or, whoever you have a comfort level with directly. I think that will help very much our community engagement work, tying all these bits and pieces together. So we cannot disable comments on the page, unfortunately, because I don't know that the intention is to have conversation in the Facebook page. The intention is to be able to disseminate or to get information about what we're doing out and invite people to contact us elsewhere. But we can block people from posting like outside things in it. So I'm hoping to be able to keep an even, I don't know, to not make it a hot point for controversy, and more just a quick way to allow ourselves to have a public presence in the world until the website is able to be up and out there.
Can I ask a couple of questions? So the email, phone number, I've seen the flyer and everything. Should we expect that if someone sends something in and says, hey, I've got a comment about, let's say, the school resource officer role or something else, that would then get forwarded over to the subcommittee that's overseeing, that's doing that work? Is that right?
Absolutely. Also, it is absolutely possible to give access to the email and the phone number to anyone on the task force that would like to also be involved in taking those messages. Yeah. That's very easy. We have a Google Voice number. You just sign into it and you just get the password for the email. So so right now, I'm the one that receives them. If you would also like to receive them and be able to have access to, emailing out through the task force official email, please let me know and you all can have that. Or maybe I'll make sure you guys all have that information just in case.
Okay.
And then, it's not my email and phone number, it's all of our email and phone number. And the expectation is if anyone, like you said, if anyone calls in and has a very specific story, that would be sent out to any one of you working on that particular aspect.
Let's I'm sure you'll take care in this regard, but like there may be someone that emails from their email that says like, it says Raul Fernandez is emailing you, but then in the body of the email I say, hey, I'd like to be kept anonymous. So I'm not exactly sure how we handle that, but just bringing that issue up so we make sure that we honor that person's willingness to share, but not share their name in whatever way that means. Yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to create some kind of protocol. I think that's really important.
Okay. The other piece on the Facebook is there's plenty of places to discuss. What we need is feedback from the community that isn't about grandstanding or isn't about sort of back and forth. We need to hear people's perspectives directly. So I fully support a Facebook that gets these other, the email, the phone number, and other ways to reach us out there. But I don't, I guess I agree with you that, I don't plan on spending much time looking at back and forth between people on a Facebook group. I don't think that's going to be particularly helpful for us.
Absolutely not.
So if people want to reach us, the way to reach us is to actually send us a note. And we are going to be in the new year having a number of public forums where we would love for anyone to show up and share their thoughts on the work that we've done so far and policing and public safety in general in the town. But just knowing that like a discussion, back and forth on Facebook isn't going to help us get anywhere, I don't think.
Right. I hope to be very explicit about that. It's just a good place to post when we do have public hearings or the schedule for our regular meetings, whatever.
Yeah, if I could just intervene quickly. I'm going to keep my video off just because I've been having kind of spotty connection issues this morning. But Devin had actually raised the prospect of a Facebook page with me earlier in the week, and I had responded with an opinion as to whether it would be permissible under the open meeting law. I don't know if you got that message, Bonnie, but I did look into that, and there are a couple cases actually involving or determinations involving the town of Brookline, which basically says the public bodies, this committee, can communicate to the public through social media, but it needs to draw the line at the members of the public body cannot engage in deliberation with other members, in that same social media page or that social media medium. So, my opinion, I don't think if the idea is that you're going to create a Facebook page that, the members of that Facebook page or that Facebook group is going to be the members of this committee. I don't think you can necessarily do that. I think that would be a violation of the open meeting law. And just for example, there was one case involving the school committee. And in that case, the school committee had designated a social media liaison. And that was essentially tasked with ensuring public knowledge of committee activity via social media. And, that was permissible. So that would be like one person communicating messages from the committee to the public at large through social media. But at the same time, the decision made clear that other members couldn't then respond to your comment or to your statement on the Facebook page or group or your own personal post or whatever that may be. And I know that I went off again.
We can hear you.
We heard you though. Yeah, maybe.
You can still.
Go ahead.
You can still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. It was a little choppy just there, but we heard what you said though.
So just so I understand.
Okay.
Just so I make sure that I have it straight in my head, what you're saying is we can put information out, but it's not okay for us in this room to be conversing on that Facebook page or whatever the social media is.
Yeah, and I would caution against as well, like, the same thing. If this is a Facebook group and you're going to post a message to the Facebook group, and everybody on this committee is a member of that Facebook group, I think that would be problematic. I think it has to be, you are posting it individually, like to your, if you want to create a Bonnie Bastion member of this committee type, profile or something, I think that would be fine. You post it to that, your own personal, personal message. And it goes to the public, or you post it on the townwide. Just what?
Let's do this, because I don't want to figure out the right way to set up a Facebook page.
Yeah.
That we have left in this meeting. Maybe if you all can discuss that offline and do it in a way that meets all the relevant standards. I would also encourage in the about us, or to make sure that to say like, look, here's why we can't engage in discussion as a task force in this space. So we shouldn't expect responses there, although we're happy to talk privately with people, that kind of thing. But I'd leave it to you all to discuss offline how to go about setting that up.
This is Devin.
According to the email. Oh, sorry.
If you just want to hang out for 5 minutes after the meeting, we can clear this up really quickly. If you want to hang out on the Zoom.
Sure.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, great. Any other questions here? Okay, I think you got my feedback. Okay, great. All right, thank you very much. Please keep it up, and let us know what you need in terms of support. We now are going to go to the Departmental Analysis Subcommittee, which has a report that you all should have seen. I am about to put a link to it in the chat for all panelists and attendees. It should also be available for those at home. If you go to our Taskforce webpage and go to the packet for today's meeting, you should be able to see that report there as well. Okay.
So Raul, I just wanted to let folks know, the link is to a Google Doc. I did late last night finally convert it to a PDF, and I've uploaded that PDF into the folder for today's task force meeting. I finally figured out that members can load things to the folders as well. So if you'd rather see it in a PDF format complete, it's in the folder for today's meeting. And I apologize for everyone for getting it so late. I know it's kind of lengthy to look at the day before of the meeting.
Problem. Well, thank you very much. So who would like to lead this off in the Departmental Analysis Subcommittee?
Well, just by way of introduction, I'll just say there's essentially two components of this document and our recommendations. The first is about a piece of content focused on traffic enforcement, which is one role of the police department not covered in any other subcommittee. And then we have a process recommendation. In other words, how the department learns new information, learns from the citizens, and improves its work over time. But we're going to talk about the second part listed in the document, which is traffic enforcement first. And for that, I'll have Chi-Chi and probably Mike take over. Go, Chi-Chi.
Yeah, thank you.
Before you go, sorry, Devin, is there a link to our packet that we can put in the chat for anyone that may not have it?
Yes, I'll grab it.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Chi-Chi, sorry.
Thanks, Devin. Yeah, I mean, before I get into the traffic enforcement, I mean, maybe Eitan was going to say this, but I thought that Kristen's presentation about the community engagement subcommittee's thoughts and works does dovetail really well with what Eitan's going to present in the second half of the presentation. And I want to let folks know, when I wrote up this report and had the process or the structural change first and then the traffic one, we're probably going to reverse that in the final report. But it was too cumbersome to do that at the last minute before this meeting. So, and the reason we're going to do that is, I mean, we spent a lot of time on traffic enforcement, both in terms of the subcommittee's work, in terms of the research, and in terms of this task force too. I mean, as you know, we spent one meeting looking at traffic enforcement statistics from Chief O'Leary. We spent another meeting looking at traffic patterns and where drivers are coming from Todd Corain. So as you can see from the report, there are some significant racial disparities when you look at traffic enforcement. So this is starting on page, starting on page 5 of the report. Just a little introduction that, traffic enforcement is one of the primary ways the public comes in contact with the police. It's also been the context nationally where we've seen some of the most horrifying incidents. Looking at Brookline specifically, you'll see that there are disparities between the Brookline population and who gets traffic citations population-wise, and that's a table at the toward the end of page 5. So, often the rejoinder to that is, well, in Brookline, there's a lot of cars coming from Boston or from other communities, and that's true. 86% of motorists stopped by the Brookline police are not residents, according to the data provided by Chief O'Leary. So that's why we had the Transportation Minister, Todd Corain, come present that map that all of you saw on the task force last week. That's in the report. And you heard the analysis that he provided as to where traffic comes from. And it's actually predominantly not Boston. It's, a lot of it comes from the western and southern suburbs. Some of it comes from Cambridge and Watertown. And then to the extent it comes from Boston, it comes from Alston, Brighton, Longwood. And so I did a little work to look at the racial composition of all the areas that traffic's coming from. That's in Appendix C. The upshot is there's still a lot of racial disparities when you look at where traffic is coming from in terms of the western, southern suburbs, Alston, Brighton, Longwood, Fenway, Cambridge and Watertown. And then the report also goes through some of the statistics showing racial disparities and, who gets a warning versus a ticket. And that's in a table on page 8. So, there's a lot of racial disparities. There are other communities, as we discussed before, that are looking at moving traffic toward to civilians. Cambridge is one, Berkeley is one, we talked about that. The issue in Massachusetts is it looks like Massachusetts law requires that traffic citations and traffic stops be conducted by police. And so it would require a state law change. And so getting to the recommendations, which are on page 10, some of the recommendations could be, so one recommendation that's pretty straightforward is, we wait to see what Berkeley and Cambridge do in this area. Berkeley's retaining a consultant. There'll be a study we can look at. Cambridge is ahead of us in this in terms of their efforts. Other possible options, which we should talk about as a task force. One would be recommending introduction of a bill or home rule petition in the state legislature permitting certain limited traffic functions to be fulfilled by civilians. And we'd have to talk about what exactly that is. We know in New York, certain limited traffic functions like directing traffic in intersections is conducted by civilians who are placed in the police department. And then the other recommendation has to do with automated traffic enforcement by cameras. That has been one suggestion as to reducing racial disparities. There's complexities about that, of course. I talked to someone from the ACLU, Massachusetts, their racial justice project director, Rasan Hall. And this is something they are thinking about because on one hand, there's privacy implications and you want to make sure that the cameras are equitably distributed. On the other hand, there is an argument that that would be fairer than having subjective individuals give out citations. And so there's been a bill introduced this past year, as we talked about, and one recommendation is once it's refiled for the coming legislative year that we support that. So that's a quick recap of traffic. I don't know if Mike wants to add anything. He contributed to the discussion of the traffic analysis.
No, I think that's fine. Except to say that it's very difficult, at least for me, to conclude anything except that the analysis validates the complaints about driving while black. I mean, it's just, if you look at the distribution of where traffic comes from, and that was something that I raised. I said, well, where does the traffic come from? And when we found, there is good data on where the traffic comes from, it's just really hard to conclude that there isn't some built-in bias in the way citations are distributed. And that's a significant point of friction. And if there's some way to remove that point of friction, I think that would go a long way toward making or I hope that would go a long way towards making the African American community in particular less uncomfortable about Brookline police.
I just want to point out that Mike's conclusion, there is a sentence in there about it. Folks may want to zero in on that in talking about how the disparities may point to implicit or explicit bias.
One thing, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we've been discussing, as Chichi said, this issue around traffic stops for a long time now, and I want to make sure that we get to some of the stuff that we haven't talked about in this meeting. I will say that I think there's room for improvement on what's page 10 in the packet, which is likely page 8 in the report. The new charts that are in there, I think we can fill out a little bit more, especially looking at some of the really sharp disparities that we saw earlier on in terms of speeding tickets in particular, which are a high number of the stops, maybe a plurality of the stops that take place in Brookline, and looking also at adding some categories about the percentage of white motorists as part of the whole versus those, and then start to look at some of those, whether or not they're getting ticketed or getting citations. There's a little bit more I think we can fill out here. So Mike, maybe you and I can work on that, in the next couple weeks.
Right, I'm happy to do that. That's going as deep into the data as you think we need to do. Yep.
Awesome.
And by the way, just to remind folks, the Google document is a living document, so you can make changes to that. That is public in terms of the public can view it. So if you want to just do it straight in the Google Doc, that's an option.
Great. So let's keep going with Eitan, and we'll see if we have what questions we have after. But Eitan, take it away.
Yeah. So the other part of our work was focused on process and how the department learns and improves over time. And the way we kind of divide this out, having interviewed Chief O'Leary about it and thought through it, is that essentially the department learns from officers on the ground who are working and providing input about what's going well and what's not going well to the police department administrators. Another way is there's a lot of learning from outside experts, from conferences and that kind of thing that officers go to. And then in theory, there's a lot of opportunities for citizen input, but in practice, it's not a big part of how the department learns. So, it's always useful to, I think, have analogies here. So, in the document, there's an analogy of the school department and oversight from citizens there. I'm sure all of us in our professional experience have all variations of oversight. I think as a college professor, not only do I have deans and chairs and teaching assistants who provide me input and can go to conferences and workshops, but of course I have student evaluations, every student, every class, every year. We have anonymous rate my professor boards. We have students who come to us and say, we want to talk to the faculty about equity in terms of racial and gender representation on syllabi. There's lots of ways we get input. And if you think about the police department in Brookline, there's really very little of any of that in terms of citizen input or citizen oversight. There are some kind of PR opportunities where the police department attends like a public fair. There have been occasional town meetings or coffee hours where someone can talk to a police officer. And of course, it's a complaint process. But that kind of is the extent right now of the opportunities for ideas and oversight from the citizens. Of course, the select board has this role of oversight of the police department. But as we've heard from Raul, the select board has a lot going on and is not able to prioritize this issue in the way that the structure of school oversight in the town, given the kind of distributed authority by different groups, has, it always remains high on the agenda. And so in this document, we've proposed a form of citizen oversight, and that citizen oversight is intended to add to the ways that the department already gets information and ideas, going to conferences, learning from rank and file officers. And the oversight involves essentially a formal committee, permanent committee of maybe something like 5 residents of the town. And as the document articulates, there are a number of roles this permanent committee would have. One is learning with the department. So if department's going to conferences, this committee can go too when citizens are allowed to go to such things. The committee has an opportunity to conduct regular interviews with officers about their experiences and suggestions. The committee would host regular, like maybe every other month, of public forums where citizens can offer feedback to the police. The committee will take minutes. The police department will show up to have regular check-ins for the sake of accountability. This committee would be an advocate to the select board and town meeting in terms of input and recommendations. The committee would be a public advocate, and it provides some oversight functions to resolve civilian complaints, to work with the department approving mutual aid agreements and equipment procurements, to keep on the department's agenda anti-bias training and work through, when we learn information like about traffic enforcement bias or evidence of bias, to make sure the department's thinking through that and working toward solutions. So that's the basic recommendation, which is a kind of a permanent committee to do all of this work. And I have some further thoughts or commentary about it, but I think it's probably a good time to pause and ask for feedback or suggestions or criticisms of any kind.
Thanks, Eitan. And again, you can find on page 6 of your packet, which I think is page 4 of the report, the main body of these recommendations. It starts on the previous page where it says formal citizen oversight. And also, Michael Zurab, I see you with your hand up in the attendees, fully aware that the Select Board's Committee on Policing Reforms is also looking at some manner of civilian oversight. I want to get you in this conversation, but hang tight and let's hear from members of the task force first. Bonnie, I see you.
So that Michael Zurab comment or moment makes a lot of sense. And what the thought I was just having is that just for my own clarification, how do you think about the reform and committee's work and this work as being different?
Who's that question to?
Anyone of y'all.
I mean, I don't know if this is helpful, but I think we're learning a lot over time about how the police department reacts to our recommendations. I like the couple incidents we've had, like the one you described about the walk and talk officer. I learned a lot from that. And what I'm trying to learn is essentially whether the department accepts feedback and criticism. Or if the traffic enforcement data, what do they do with that? Does the department on its own really want to take that into their own hands and work on it and address it? Or is the response just defensive, thin-skinned PR, we're doing everything fine, there's no racial bias? To me, the teeth that we need to put into our recommendations in some ways are a reaction to that. And so what I would say is we need a much more aggressive form of citizen oversight that really defines the whole work of the department, to the extent that the department as it's currently operating is not a productive contributor to reform. It's possible that the department can be an active, thick-skinned player in reform, and I think that the reform committee might be able to have a I don't know exactly what they're doing, but might be able to gauge it in some way there. But I think if the department's culture is such that they are just oppositional, just defensive, not willing to change anything, then what we need to do is come in and recommend something much more aggressive in sort of treating the department in the way that I guess it wants to be treated, which is to not actually be productive on these issues of addressing racial bias in particular.
Yeah, I'll just further respond just to say that I think item G is the area that I'd like to flesh out some more, and what essentially item G, that is to me the critical piece, which would be a body that would more closely be aware of the operations of the police department, so that it could provide not just substantive input, but what this says is approval of mutual aid agreements, approval of the procurement of certain equipment, approval of the type of anti-bias training that the department might engage in, and so that the department isn't just doing this on their own with, frankly, right now, very little input from the select board, and such as it is, when items come to the select board, we get some information in a packet, we have an opportunity in the moment to ask questions about it. Maybe we revisit it a week later if we've got some more serious questions about something, but not the real time to dig into these things and to get into the important minutia of these, and sometimes not just minutia, but some of the big issues related here. And this would be a body that would have to approve of these changes before it would even go to the select board. At least as we've got it written right now. So that's for us to discuss and see what else we want to do with it.
The other thing we had talked about potentially, but is not in the report, and we thought about is, what is the strongest teeth or lever in terms of dealing with the police department to make sure that, any committee, oversight committee would have some real power. And one thing could be that this body could make recommendations, and they would only be recommendations, because Mike made that very clear, to advisory committee or the town meeting on the police department's budget.
Mike, want to jump in?
Yeah, so I think we need to be very cautious about language. And as I was listening to Eitan, and as I've been reminded by others on the subcommittee, words matter. And terms matter. I think one of our tasks is certainly what we're doing. Here are some things that we see that need to be fixed in some significant way. In order to get them fixed, who is it that you have to convince? If you present this as an offensive against the police department, the natural response of the officers, no matter what the hierarchy says, the natural response of the officers is very much the same sort of defensive attitude as we saw in the interview with the walk and talk officers. They're going to feel like they're trying to do the best jobs that they can. They feel they provide a service. Who are these people who are attacking them unfairly? there's an element of showing the police officers the data, showing the police officers what we see, and having a discussion about that in order to get them to understand how they're viewed by people that they don't talk to. I do want to make sure that when we're talking about changing, whether it's traffic enforcement or oversight board or whatever it is, that we make sure that we're presenting this as an opportunity to have a dialogue with the people who are on the street, the officers who are on the street, and that we want to listen to them, and we want them to listen to us. And so you don't want to set this up as, well, we're going to tell you what you do now, because they're not going to do it.
Eitan, if you want to respond briefly, I just want to make sure we have time for members of the task force to chime in here.
Yeah, look, I mean, Mike, I would say I came into this task force with that attitude. I think I've had very pleasant and respectful and interesting conversations with Chief O'Leary along these lines. I really respect how Chief O'Leary has presented information throughout this task force hearing. At the same time, I think I disagree with you, Mike, because I have to say that the behavior we just heard about with the walk and talk officer is really concerning. I mean, I am really upset to hear that. And when it comes down to it, it's not a dialogue. This is a town with taxpayers in charge, and these are employees. And if they don't want to play nicely with us, sorry, this is not a dialogue among equals. These are employees these are public servants. And I would love it for it to be, I really would. I would love for our experience to be collaborative and non-oppositional. I really would love that. And honestly, before I heard about the walk and talk officer and the various other incidents, that was my mood. But that changes very quickly, in my opinion, when you have people acting the way we've just observed. And, again, many of us here, we're employees. We have stakeholders, and the police officers are not special. They have to be like every other employee in the world and hear feedback and do a better job. And if they can't do that, then sorry, it's not a productive collaborative relationship. It is an oppositional relationship.
It's not a matter of, yeah, absolutely. They're employees and they need to follow the.
Briefly, because I do want to get some feedback from other members.
Okay.
I just hash this out at the next subcommittee meeting.
I think if you approach it from the perspective that I think if you approach it from the perspective that you're taking and I caution you that, yeah, that was rather upsetting to see what was on that Facebook page, but it's not a surprise, honestly. And if you take it from the perspective that, well, we're going to tell them what to do, you're going to have a hard time getting them to do it, whether you tell them or, if you tell them in that way. There are better ways to work with employees than to use a hammer.
Okay, Malcolm.
Thanks. First, I want to commend the work. You set the bar really high. It's very impressive for all of us who are writing behind you. I also want to be really careful. I mean, it's true that town employees are somewhat at the beck and call of taxpayers, and town employees also carry certain expertise that, frankly, perhaps others don't carry. I want to hear from residents, but nobody's going to exactly tell me how to be able to teach, because I know most people couldn't do what I do. And so I want to be careful with that. But I also think, when I think of what this group has done, and I think about reimagining, I think we have to think about it, how it fits into those structures that already exist. And so, I mean, I know it's been said, but I'm still really curious how this information fits into like evaluation and promotion and things like that. And words do matter, information does matter, and so do names. And so, just if I'm thinking outside of the box, if this citizen group were to identify, well, Officer Malcolm Cawthorn has disproportionately given speeding tickets to Black motorists. And then that's a part of my evaluation. And we want to make sure as I progress through the police department, I don't just check boxes that I went to this conference and went to this thing. If the next year I still have disproportional tickets against Black motorists. And then when I go take a civil service exam and want for promotion, is that union going to override the fact that I haven't actually changed my behaviors versus doing what has been sort of told to toe the line? And, you know, I think we need to think about how like this citizenry might put that out. And so, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is we don't share names until you get promoted. And then it's, oh, Malcolm Cawthorn got promoted from, you know, walk and talk, you know, or police, I'll get lost in the whole naming and hierarchy, but move from there to a higher position, despite having 3 consecutive years of ticketing Black motorists at a disproportionate record. And that's where the power, I think, could come in from this group if we're really thinking about reimagining. Because then the police would have to then own why did they do it? And could they honestly like look and say, well, you know, that's the union, you know, that's the union negotiation, and you know, I'm just losing all my terms right now, but you know, like could they actually say that and stand up and say it to the Brookline citizenry? And then could perhaps select board or this citizen complaint or whatever say, well, no, that's not okay. And I think one of the things I can proudly say I learned from my mother, and, you know, I often hear from the town that they're worried about being sued and other things. Sometimes it's actually okay to get sued when you're morally right. Sometimes for a public, it's important to say, we stood on the side of morals. Yeah, we lost the battle with the union, but we actually stood on the side of morality. And sometimes that's actually worth it. I understand that can't be the entirety, but sometimes that's actually worth it. Sometimes sending the message of being right as opposed to following the line is worth every penny spent. And so I think, you know, I think this is an opportunity for us to reimagine where citizenry fits into this fold, into a real, you know, critical way. And yeah, and so I again appreciate the report. I think we have opportunities to reimagine what this means.
Thank you, Malcolm. Bonnie?
Yeah, I just wanted to, on top of what Eitan was just talking about, and thank you, Eitan. That was right up the same alley I was thinking. I bristle when people say, be nice when you are trying to get people to be held accountable. Nice is great. All of us have a responsibility to be nice and to be civil. But the power that I can see this task force having, like right now, in this conversation where we are very clear about what is, you know, what is not working, what we see, and talking very directly, is so important. And I think an oversight group is not about stroking egos or making sure, you know, people are happy. This is about very clearly, concisely, and effectively communicating what is and what is not working for the community at large. And I think that's a change that Brookline as a whole needs to have. I mean, but that's also my personality. Clearly, I'm a very direct person, but I think we need direct communication, and words do matter, but that also moves in the other direction. Clarity and you know, not worrying if a criticism makes someone sad. Criticism needs to be had, and people need to know how to understand it. As Eitan said, you need to be able to take criticism. That should be an expectation. That's not crazy.
Criticism is absolutely right. The question is how it's delivered. And they're just, Eitan, you're a member of a faculty. University faculties are notoriously difficult to command.
All right, let's do this. I feel like this is
Right.
an important but side conversation.
Okay.
What we have in front of us.
All right. I just want us to pay attention to the manner in which the criticism is delivered so that it's most effectively received.
Okay.
That's my point.
Okay. Other thoughts on the document you have before you?
Any feedback on the traffic part?
Thank you all for your brilliant detailed work on the traffic part. But otherwise, not specific responses.
Well, one thing for the task force to consider is whether you want to make the more aggressive recommendations to the select board or to town meeting about supporting various state legislation.
I think that's something I'm very much in favor of. I think on the list of state legislation recommendations that we might be able to make, I think that should be right at the top, because as I've said many times in these meetings before, I'm really concerned about very often, like a lot of the contact that people have with police is through this type of traffic enforcement, and weird things happen. And if we can move this into civilian hands, so much the better.
I'll just say, I mean, I've said this at our subcommittee, but I guess it's worth saying here. I actually, I have a very conservative disposition with regard to policy change like this, mostly because I am always nervous about unintended consequences of a policy change like this. And without a lot of information, we don't know yet anything about whether civilian traffic enforcement would be better or worse on the metrics we care about. So I would say my conservatism on that kind of policy change is counteracted in some ways by wanting this process recommendations to be stronger. And I think that it is in some ways, and this is why Chi-Chi mentioned this, we kind of wanted to reverse the order of what we talked about. We know, based on the fact that we don't have a great solution, a known solution to the traffic enforcement bias, that it's not like we can solve that by itself. And it's the reason why we need a strong process recommendation, how things happen going forward.
I'll just add, I think this is why, having strong recommendations coming out of the reform committee are important too. So for instance, to the point that that Malcolm was bringing up earlier, one of the things that we've discovered through our work here is I think a few things. One is that not enough data is collected. When it is collected, it's not used in particularly robust ways with respect to training and evaluation. But thinking about in terms of with respect to evaluation, one of the things we haven't asked yet, but I may ask Chief O'Leary to look into is the disparities that we see, for instance, in with respect to ticketing versus citations based on race, which we see especially in speeding in particular, really broad disparities, significant disparities, whether or not that's everyone that's giving to every officer that's giving tickets, or is that a certain subset of officers that are giving tickets that are driving those disparities? That we haven't had a conversation about yet. Whether or not there are 5 officers that are really driving those disparities, or 10, or whatever number it is. And if we look into the data and are aware of that, how do we use that data for retraining? How do we use that data to say, hey, it looks like we're seeing, when we look at the list, it looks like we're seeing, you're really helping to drive some of these disparities based on race. And what do we do then? How do we retrain? How do we use that in evaluating people's, promotions, or whether or not people should remain as a part of the force? Right now, I'm not aware that we do that at all. and that's so it's we had, I find us in some ways playing in the reimagining but also reform space. The reimagining being around, I really do think what Malcolm and Bonnie really and Eitan really, I think, clearly spelled out for me anyway, was reimagining the role of citizen oversight, citizen involvement in policing, but oversight specifically, and bringing citizens more closely into the decision making here, where frankly that just hasn't been the case. But also, we, to my friends on the reform committee, I think we've got to, I know work is happening there, but we've got to partner together a little bit to really rethink what data is being used and how is it being evaluated and who's it being evaluated by. And this is where citizens can come in to add transparency and accountability to the system. So let's continue those conversations. Other comments or feedback? Okay. Let's go ahead and promote Michael Zurab briefly. And because I do know
he said that he had to leave. This is in the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he had to leave to go to an appointment. He'll follow up with Eitan. Appreciate all the work you're doing.
All right. Perfect. So I missed that. Sorry. We'll follow up with Michael on that. I do think that the other body is also looking at some measure of citizen involvement. I don't know if they're calling it oversight or not, or I was in their last meeting and sort of listening to where their heads were at, but it still seems like it's percolating and there's some different ideas there. And I'm, I encourage them to continue going down the road with those plans. I think at some point it might make sense for their subcommittee and our subcommittee to gather together and compare notes. It may be that we're heading in the exact same place. It may be that we're heading to different places, and that we'll either have one recommendation coming from both bodies or different recommendations coming from each body. But I know as a select board member, I wouldn't want to make any decisions until I see recommendations that are coming from both the reform committee as well as from the Reimagining task force. So any other thoughts there? Okay. Marty, we've got 5 minutes left, so I don't want to spend time going through the report, but I think we're gonna, what I want to do is, I think G is something that we need to spend more time getting feedback from you all from, like what exactly should be in item G, and that is the oversight function. We've put a couple things in there, but that was not sort of an exhaustive process that led us to that list. So that may be, I really appreciate the way it's laid out, that sort of A and B and C, the learning alongside the department, learning from officers, and learning from citizens helps this oversight board better do D, E, F, and G, advocating to the select board, a town meeting, the public advocacy piece, but also that oversight function. But I do think that we need to build it further out, the oversight function, and actually, because at some point we've got to determine what we think they should have oversight of versus what a police chief can reasonably be expected to just do. I mean, they've, to keep the department functioning regularly. And so if there are thoughts on that, I think in this sort of interim space between now and the next time we meet, I'd love for you to provide feedback to the subcommittee on those. You can do that. Probably the most effective way. We'll find a very effective way for you to do that. I mean, you can email Devin and that can be shared, but there might be a better way to do that through a public document where you can make comments. And we'll figure that part out. Gigi?
Yeah, I had thought about what you asked about allowing task force members to comment. The only problem is commenting and editing don't seem to work well unless I invite people who have a Gmail account, unfortunately. So okay. I could try to do that with anybody who has a Gmail account, so you could post a comment directly on the document. Or we could set up a second document just on commenting on G. I mean, I also would like some comment back on the legislative recommendations, because I do think, I personally would support making the more aggressive ones. I think there is some support. I understand Eitan's concern, but what we're talking about is making a recommendation to the state legislature. Things like unintended consequences will be thoroughly hashed out at the level of the state legislature. So it's sort of a statement from Brookline that, hey, we're on board or we're interested in pushing this discussion. So I could set up a Google Doc on those two issues and have people post things. As I said, the big issue is it doesn't seem to work well with non-Gmail addresses.
Right. And I think, and maybe we can do is revisit this report at our next meeting. I think the question that Gigi asked is one that we need to get the feedback from the task force on, or honestly a vote from the task force on at some point. The item that I mentioned, the oversight function, is something that we need to hear back from the task force on specifically. And then there may be other pieces in here that you want to comment on, but we're going to need to make sure before we sort of vote the report as a task force that we are sure that everybody's very comfortable with it, that maybe not everybody be comfortable with it, but that you've had a chance to really thoroughly review it, to comment on it, that comments have been incorporated to the extent necessary into the document, and that we come back with a fully vetted report for the task force. And again, that's going to be a report that, along with the rest of our reporting, is going to be presented to the public, commented on, and then for us to make changes based on the comment, or not, but to sort of review the document once again after the public has had a chance, and the public broadly defined has had a chance to comment on our work. So this is a very early stage in this process, but it's an important stage so we can make sure we're going in the right direction, that members of the task force have opportunity to weigh in, even before we sort of bring it out to the broader public. All right, we are at 9:59. So what we'll do is we'll put a pin in this conversation. We'll make sure that we can follow up at our very next meeting, which is going to be Thursday, January 7th. Yes, folks, for those out there that are watching, we're going to meet on a Thursday in January, just for that first meeting, and then we'll resume our regular Friday meetings. But if you do have feedback, please reach out to us with that feedback. Okay. I think we're going to leave it there. I just want to, say, for everybody that's been celebrating the holidays, happy holidays to you all, and the tremendous work of the task force members and staff, and everybody who is putting some serious time into this work, and not just time, but being really thoughtful about the work you're doing and the recommendations that you're putting forward. I keep encouraging people to watch us work because I'm really proud of the work that you all are doing and that we're doing together. So just want to say thank you, happy holidays, and looking forward to coming back in the new year and continuing this work. So thank you all.